Hello everyone and welcome to this week's lecture on true Dhamma, following in the footsteps of the Buddha. Today we continue with part 2 of chapter 5, is a chapter on virtue. Last time we discussed all kinds of very important topics when it comes to virtue and why it is a so misunderstood topic in both Buddhism and Christianity, and also when it comes to the colloquial terms that are just floating around society. Whenever something religious is involved, at least in Europe or especially Germany, then there is automatically a slightly negative connotation to the term. They usually focus on the negative aspects, but that is usually not what the Buddha was referring to when he was talking about virtue. Then last time we had a short story time and we introduced the chief disciples of the Buddha, namely the general of the Dhamma, Sariputta, and the foremost among those with spiritual powers, Mahamoggallana. Then we had a short discourse on the importance of merit and on the original meaning of merit. And I am, as always, or as often, setting up my phone in the background so that I know the time, so I won't overdo it. And after the short discourse on merit and charity, we started with the training precepts and the role of the precepts in general. And today we will continue where we left off. Last time we finished the 5 training precepts, and this time we will continue with the 8 precepts. The 8 precepts are for very serious practitioners, and in essence they expand on the already existing 5 precepts. So the first 5 rules are more or less the same. You should not kill, you should not steal, you should not engage in any kind of sexual or sensual misconduct, and you should not engage in false speech of any kind. And, as always, you should not take any drugs that lead to heedlessness. Now, you could argue that it is not so clear what kind of drug would lead to heedlessness. It is probably fine to drink coffee, as an example, and it would probably even fine to smoke, as the nicotine does not really impair your mental judgment. In itself, it's obviously not a good idea to follow some kind of addiction into that direction, and that would probably be covered by the 3rd precept. But overall, it's not necessarily a drug that leads to heedlessness. So, at least from that standpoint, it would probably be okay. But I would never encourage any person to smoke, as an example, because it's obviously bad for your health, and it's obviously better to resist that urge and to restrain the senses that want the smoking, as an example. So yeah, but now to point 6 of the 8 precepts, and this one is a bit more hard to implement for most practitioners, at least for most lay practitioners, because what it essentially says is that you should restrain yourself when it comes to sensual pleasures. And this is what is pretty much necessary to reach the 2nd stage of awakening, where you overcome the sensual pull of the mundane kind. You stop being affected by sensuality overall. You eradicate or severely weaken, pretty much. In the case of the 2nd stage of awakening, you severely weaken lust and hatred. So sensuality will never have the same pull or the same effect on you ever again. So this includes no dancing at the time of the Buddha. Those were the main kinds of intoxication, the main kinds of sensuality and entertainment. No music, no visiting theater shows or something like that, or shows in general. No flowers, they decorated themselves with a garland, as an example. So jewelry and things like that would probably also be included nowadays. No makeup, no wearing of ornaments, so no fancy clothing to just catch the attention of other people, and no decorations in general. So in essence, you pretty much moderate your sensual intake. You restrain yourself to a very severe degree, and this is a very hard pill to swallow and very difficult to implement for most people nowadays. Simply because we are so caught up in sensuality that it's incredibly difficult to give this up. And this is, by the way, also the reason why the Dhamma is so difficult to understand for most people nowadays. The deeper down the sensual road you are, the harder it is to understand, because your attention will not settle on the Dhamma. Your mind will usually, at least, not leap out to understanding the Dhamma, because there is always something sensual coming up that is more important to your mind, because it has, learned, even if it is wrong knowledge to a degree, that such things at least temporarily work when it comes to the numbing of the existential pain. And the seventh rule is also very important, and it concerns itself with the most unpopular topic that is out there for most people, namely celibacy. You should not engage in any kind of sexual intercourse, and I'm pretty sure that masturbation is also included in this kind of precept. Masturbation is obviously a rather touchy topic, as most people completely define themselves around their sexuality. And I would not be surprised if about 90% of human striving is directed towards finding a sexual partner. Especially in the Western world, family, as an example, is pretty much glorified. And finding sexual partners is pretty much the highest goal of them all. People try to seek happiness in that domain. That it's rarely ever possible to find it there is another story. As an example, we have a extremely high divorce rate in the West. I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the world, but it's getting worse over time. So there is no, at least permanent happiness to be found in such kinds of engagement, which is also very important to keep in mind. And everyone who is self-honest with themselves knows it. And this is even more true for the sexual intercourse of the fleeting kind, where you just do hookups or dating or something like that. It is just a quick surge of pleasure, but it's by no means related to any kind of contentment, happiness, or peace, as the Buddha described it. In fact, it even makes it more harder to attain, as you get addicted to that kind of sensual pleasure, and this is by no means a good idea. So, what the Buddha is moderating here, when it comes to the 8 precepts, is overall just the engagement in sensuality. He pretty much lists all the elements that people use to derive pleasure from. And at the time of the Buddha, that was distraction, as named by the 6th precept. Then it is sexual intercourse, or any kind of sexual engagement, which is one of the strongest human drives and is covered by the 7th precept. And then we have the last one, which is the moderation in eating. And this one is also very important, in fact. You moderate yourself when it comes to eating before noon. So you eat all the food for the entire day before 12 o'clock, pretty much. And the idea behind that is that at least the idea behind the rule is that many monks got hurt, as an example, when they went out in the middle of the night to collect some food from villagers, which is not a very good idea, and it's not very respectful when it comes to the visitors. So the Buddha kind of streamlined the process so that there is a time for pindapat, for the alms round, where the monks collect the foods, so that the villagers that are willing to give food know when it will happen, so that they don't have to be on the watch all day. So there's just a time for collecting alms, and everyone knows about it, and the entire process is very streamlined. The chances of injury are very, very low, and it's also surprisingly good for your health if you moderate yourself in eating. Many of the modern diseases, for example, are very much related to overconsumption of any kind. So if you eat too much, especially when it comes to the sugary kinds of foods, to the fatty kinds of food, and especially in combination, then over the long term you will very likely develop some nagging pains, diseases, and especially metabolic problems like diabetes or other diseases that are very much related to high cortisol levels and things like that. So you should always be very careful, and the Buddha was very much promoting a lifestyle where you would only eat 1 meal a day, and he was very clear that it promotes health. And he was very pragmatic when it comes to that. He even said that monks could attain health like his. He was surprisingly healthy for the amount of self-torture he went through, and that he put his body through. So it's probably a good idea to be moderate in eating. And now to the special importance of that precept, namely that we have to eat. Eating is fundamental for being a human. If we want to stay alive, we have to eat. So this rule is especially tricky. Many people are addicted to food, but they cannot stop eating. So when it comes to celibacy, the addiction to sexuality pretty much, then, or avoiding any addiction to sexuality, then it's pretty simple to implement that. You can just stop all out if you are strong enough, but you can never stop eating. So you will always be around your prior addiction if you have been addicted to food, and it's especially difficult to overcome that. So the Buddha suggested that you restrain yourself when it comes to eating. And he even said at some point in the suttas that some monks are able to not be absorbed into the most delicious kinds of curry. So this is also something that is very important, because the eating, the survival instinct, is the only one that is even stronger than the sexual intercourse drive, let's put it like that. And essentially the 5 precepts are moderation and sensual engagement. an addition to the already existing precepts of not killing, not stealing, not doing anything that violates the laws of Dhamma, namely the laws of non-self in a major way. And now we come to the advanced rules, to the truly advanced rules for apprentice monks and nuns, as an example. And those are the 10 precepts. Those are basically the 8 precepts plus not accepting any kind of currency or any kind of other property, pretty much. Since those have been practiced by novice monks, and there was always a 4 months test period in the early days for wanderers of other sects. So when anyone wanted to join the Buddha's Sangha and also practice towards liberation, then they had to go through a test period, because there were too many negative experiences with people that just try to infiltrate the Sangha pretty much and put a schism in the Sangha. So to split the people, to pretty much harm the dispensation of the Buddha out of greed or some other evil motivation, pretty much. So yeah, and many people who were very serious even offered to be on probation pretty much for 4 years instead of 4 months, just to show their dedication. Yeah, and those people, those new novice monks, usually lived restrained by the Patimokkha. And those are hundreds of rules for monks and nuns. And there is also the concept, we will go into detail concerning the Patimokkha in a few slides. And concerning other practices, there was also the concept of the Uposatha. And this was a time where lay practitioners, in particular, chose to abide by the 8 precepts on chosen days, namely the full moon, the new moon, and the half moon. Pretty much, I don't know, every 7 or every 14 days. I'm not too sure anymore. But the point is that there were some reserved days where people were refraining from any kind of addictive material. And again, there is nothing really mystical about those Uposatha observances. It is just that you frequently detox yourself. You could view that as an ancient kind of instant gratification detox that is also very popular nowadays. And those kinds of detoxes show you very, very well how addicted you are to sensuality. Because the harder it is to observe such a short period of time without any sensual pleasures, the deeper down the sensuality road you are, pretty much. And it reminds you of your addictions and about the benefits of renunciation. So the Buddha was very clear about the benefits of the Uposatha, and he was even mentioning that it is possible that some people benefit to a degree that it is very clear to them that they should go for refuge to the Dhamma, the Sangha, and the Buddha, pretty much. Okay, but let us now come to the next slide, namely to the Vijnana and to the Patimokkha. And this is pretty much the section on the code of conduct, the moral code of behavior for monastics. As a lay practitioner, you could always also abide by those rules, but most of the time those were for the most serious kind of practitioner. And they pretty much consist of the following books, namely the Sutta Vibhanga, the Mahavagga, and the Kulavagga, and later also the Parivara. And for the purpose of keeping the Dhamma alive, those rules have been, proclaimed by the Buddha. And he pretty much forbade everything that could harm the community. So whenever there was a misdeed performed by any practitioner and in the name of the Buddha or in the dispensation of the Buddha introduced a new rule. So he always only created rules when it was necessary. And most of the rules have only been introduced after like 20 years past the initial liberation of the Buddha. So it actually was only really necessary quite late when it comes to the teaching period of the Buddha. So half the lifetime of teaching was already over when he started to introduce the first rules. And I did another video a few months ago, I think, by the time this video is released, about the stuff that the Buddha had to deal with during his time. The amount of detail when it comes to sexual misconduct is outright terrifying. So people did horrible things, and probably out of sexual desperation when they started to become monks. And it's really not a good idea to go down that path. And the Buddha was very clear, as long as there is an intention involved of wanting such things, then you will be, he called it, defeated. So when you go for the sexual stuff, and I'm not even sure if I want to talk about that, but there were animals involved, there were corpses involved, and everything like that. If you did any of that out of wanting to do that, then the Buddha called you defeated, and then you could no longer be part of the Sangha. And the rules of the Patimokkha and the Vinaya are mainly focused on sex, on stealing, on killing, on lying and deceiving other people. And monks were doing all kinds of such things. Sometimes highway robbers were disguising themselves as monks simply to avoid some kind of punishment by kings and other governments pretty much. And the Buddha had to do something to keep his order clean and to ensure that the Dhamma will be there for a long time. So he was very rigid in creating new rules to protect the community, so to make sure that we still have access to the good Dhamma nowadays. But pretty much all of those rules, and this is very important, can be summarized by do not act out of greed, aversion or delusion in body, speech and mind. There was a monk who came to the Buddha complaining that he is not able to keep 150 rules. At that point they were 150 and not 227 or over 300 for nuns. And the Buddha said, well, if you can't do that, just abide by those 3 rules. And he later, I think, became an arahant. I'm not too sure on that anymore, but in essence, all those rules anyway boil down to those 3 things. It is just that some people try to rationalize, their minds rationalize heavily, and they need more specific instructions, because otherwise their mind will simply ignore that those rules also apply to the area where they try to engage in sensuality. And there really is nothing new on this earth. Past generations were very bad, so there is hope for this generation. And I really want to emphasize that point, because many people think that it is not possible to become a stream enterer even anymore today. So that the train is long gone for any good Dhamma. But that is not true. The good Dhamma is still around, and the good Dhamma is still alive. And if you wish and choose to, you can still practice it. And this is very important. And now we come to very detailed instructions about restraint and enduring, or to be more specific, to sense restraint and enduring feelings, or the pressure of our feelings. So first of all, both sense restraint and enduring feelings are absolutely essential for any kind of spiritual progress. And this is something that is very hard to swallow nowadays, because people are so heavily engaged in sensuality. They don't want to restrain themselves. But if you do not restrain yourself and do not act out of the initial impulses of the mind, then you cannot inspect those things that you have to inspect, namely your craving or your own mind's reaction to negative feelings, to bad feelings. If you immediately make them go away by engaging in sensuality, then you can never analyze them, you can never ponder them, and you can never feel them on the level where you have to feel them. This is incredibly important, and thus it is such an essential skill. And the goal is always of those kinds of virtuous practices to, behave in a Dhamma way, in a way that is in line with non-self, without knowing what that really is. So in that sense, you are still going by faith, you are still emulating other people, and thus you are cultivating emotional non-reactivity and refraining from the unwholesome. And it's absolutely necessary for later steps in the Buddha's dispensation. For insights, you have to see things while good and bad feelings are present, without getting swept away by them. And this is so important. I cannot overemphasize that point. You have to see pretty much the true nature of all things, and this includes craving. When you immediately make it go away, you can never understand it, and when you can never understand it, then you can never be liberated from it. So when you are busy all the time, and distracted all the time, or engaged in sensual pleasures all the time, there is no time left where you could understand those things that you have to understand. And non-restraint is pretty much an immediate reaction of getting rid of parts of your experience because you do not like them. But those parts you do not like are especially those parts that you have to understand. And this pretty much prevents calm seeing, because you look away, cope, or distract yourself instead. And calm or direct seeing is pretty much what wisdom is. Buddhist nun Ayakema again called it a recognized experience. And to recognize any part of the suttas, of the Dhamma, in your experience, you have to let that experience be as it is, without changing it or getting rid of it or wanting more of it. And this is why there is no Dhamma without restraint and enduring and all those things. And this is also very important, because many people think that the restraint is to blame for the bad feelings that come out of it. But this is not true. Restraint just reveals your addiction. It does not create it. You have to place the blame correctly. It is not that the restraint feels bad and is to blame for the bad feelings. It is your prior engagement in sensuality that made you addicted to it that is to blame for the bad feelings that are revealed by the restraint. It is not that the restraint creates negativity. It just shows you how much sensual debt you have accumulated. And without enduring and restraint, you won't see the problem of sensuality in the first place, and you will never try to overcome it. When you don't see a problem, you will not fix it. So you really have to restrain yourself to even think about practicing the Dhamma. This is why, again, the Vijnana, or the moral rules, pretty much in the part on virtue, has been recited first on the Arahant Summit that collected and gathered all the teachings and tried to streamline them. And now a slide on the automaticity of all the processes that we are talking about today. Because again, it is very automatic, and I want to highlight that with a few lines and a small experiment again. And first of all, reacting or following the pressure of a feeling is automatic, and it is called reacting. And for a regular person, pretty much 100% of all acts that they do are reactions. They very rarely exercise their, let's call it, free will and resist an impulse, an emotional impulse, and don't go for it. It is a very unpopular thing to do. If you train yourself in a mundane way by doing, no-fap or restrain yourself in eating, then still 95% of all your thoughts, words, and deed happen basically automatically because there is a feeling that makes you do that. So there's rarely a choice involved. You rarely choose to disrupt or interrupt an existing routine. And we pretty much always automatically react upon the presence of a bad feeling. We either want more agreeable things or we want disagreeable things to go away. And as an example, some people, the looks of some people, some flowers, some meals, or music, or any kind of entertainment, has a very strong grip on us. It enchants us, and we don't really have any say in what our senses like or dislike. So what we deem agreeable or disagreeable is completely beyond us. We cannot choose that, at least not directly. We can indirectly train the mind in a way so that it won't go for such things. But what the eye or the other senses like is beyond us. It's not within the realm of our capability to choose that actively, pretty much. And initially we have to say no to things when it comes to those likings and dislikings, so that the senses do not automatically go for it or make us go for it, so that we do not automatically follow those things. And this is what many people have a very hard time understanding, because they own those impulses so strongly that they think that they are going for it and not that they are forced to do it by their senses. They have not ever considered saying no to those impulses in a very serious way, so they have never encountered the problem of restraint, namely that it is freaking hard to do. In fact, the Buddha called the entire training the hardest thing that you can ever do. And even the mind has a mind on its own. Even the mind thinks whatever it wants to think. It imagines whatever it wants to imagine. It fantasizes about things it wants to fantasize about, unless you restrain it and tame the mind to achieve a state where those senses, those 6 sensory organs, have no longer the same pull on you. And even the mind is a sensory organ in Buddhism, by the way, because it senses thoughts, it senses mental objects. Those objects are, let's say, already there, and you just become aware of them. And overall, humans have much less control than you think. And the entire process is very much like taming a feral dog or a wild animal in general. The Buddha really often compared the entire process of taming the mind with taming a wild elephant. He chose the elephant as the biggest animal to show how difficult the task really was. Because in the beginning, the mind is much, much stronger than your own wish to overcome the entire mass of suffering. The mind wants its sensuality. And it will do everything it is capable of to get it. And you really have to exert yourself to tame the mind in a way that it no longer goes instantaneously for all the instant gratification. And now to a small experiment to really give you a good intuition on the entire meaning of non-self and the meaning of automaticity. And I think we already did that experiment in the past, but again, it is probably so long in the past that most of you can't remember it. So I wanted to repeat it here. And again, the first block is what we should do. Then there is a short pause where you perform the experiment or the exercise, and then there's a result. And again, to get an initial understanding of what the Buddha meant with the term non-self or anatta, we can perform a partner experiment. One of you tries to speak out loud everything he does, but before he is doing it. And the partner observes the entire performance and writes down all the things that the first person also does without announcing it beforehand. And after 5 minutes or so, or even 1 minute is probably enough, you switch roles, and in the end you evaluate the performance. You can do that now, and afterwards I will give you a few words on the general result of that experiment. So yeah, the meaning of non-self should be much clearer in the end. If you seriously tried to follow that experiment, you will be amazed by the amount of involuntary movements of body, speech and mind that the person in question, or your partner, did not announce beforehand. And if the person cannot announce it beforehand, then there was no volition involved, or no volitional activity. That person was very likely not even aware of those things happening. So it's very hard to call that any control. And this applies to many more areas than you might think. And it's very important to keep that in mind, because it vividly shows us the truth of non-self, at least on an intuitive level. So it's not the full truth. The full truth of anatta goes far beyond that. But it gives you an intuition on the fundamental problem that we are facing as humans. Okay, but let us now continue. First of all, why is all that like that? Why are we so reactive when it comes to emotions? And again, this is just an explanation from a modern perspective that should help you accept the entire facts. Feelings and emotions can be seen as an evolutionary relic or as an evolutionary, mechanism overall. It is pretty much a fast response mechanism that determines if a situation as a whole is either good or bad for the survival or for procreation of a species. Emotions and feelings happen on a more fundamental level than thoughts, as an example. Everything that arises in the mind already has such a feeling attached to anything, pretty much. Everything is already evaluated as good or bad. All the things that we even perceive are already deemed as good, bad, or neutral, or relevant to us. I like to call it relevance and not too much good, bad, or neutral. Relevant in a good way, relevant in a bad way, or completely irrelevant. So those are the three categories that you could use to explain the entire feeling business to you. Feeling is Vedana, and emotions are, let's call it, are more related to the mood or to a chitta, as the Buddha called it, chitta, citta. However you want to pronounce it, I'm not so good at pronouncing the Pali terms. And feeling overall, or feelings and emotions overall, pressure us to behave in a certain way. And that was very useful in dangerous environments. If there was something that is very dangerous, then we should immediately shy away from that very thing that is dangerous. And that frequently malfunctions nowadays in the modern environment because, there's pretty much only malfunctioning because there's no real danger of the existential kind, at least not to the degree that it occurred in an evolutionary context anymore. And yeah, there's a difference between immunity to that feeling pressure and the temporary absence of that pressure, which is why many people think themselves to be awakened or enlightened or anything like that when they meditate, as an example, because there is no pressure right now. But that is not what the Buddha was talking about. The Buddha was talking about the complete immunity to that pressure. Your mind is so, it's like being up on a mountain and every emotion and feeling is happening way down there. So you are kind of detached from that hedonic kind of feeling. It is still there, but it's not affecting you anymore. And yeah, another experiment is here on this slide. Again, the top part, then a short pause, and then the bottom part. And to really show you the intense pressure sometimes of your feelings, try sitting for 20 minutes in the middle of the room without moving. I'm challenging you right now. I can offer you, for the completion of that task, $100, $1,000, $10,000, or even $100,000. Do you think you could do it as a beginner, even if such a big reward is on the line? Again, I will pause now, and you can think and ponder about it for a moment. If you are very well meditated, then you might be able to do it. You might be able to pull it off. But the vast majority of people who never meditated before are completely incapable of doing that. Our minds will come up with all kinds of rationalizations why we actively stopped early. In reality, it just happened. We just stopped and come up with an explanation for the stopping afterwards. This is one extremely important part of non-self. Our mind tries to hide the fact of the emotional reactivity from us. It tries to hide the fact that it was pressured. And our mind hates the idea of being controlled, so it ignores it whenever possible, pretty much. So it's very important to keep in mind that the bigger I make the reward, the bigger the craving is, and it's very likely even harder to complete the task for a newcomer who has very strong greed and hatred. So that is also very important to keep in mind. And as you can see, or as you probably have felt, the pressure of your feelings gets stronger and stronger until you give in. And this is very important to keep in mind, and it really reveals the oppressive nature of our own feelings. They make us act in a certain way. They make us dance, so to speak. And I really like to illustrate the entire process with this kind of figure. There's a dotted blue line in the middle. Below the line are all the negative events or things that we perceive as negative or where there are negative feelings involved. And above the dotted line, there are all the things that have good feelings attached to them. So all the orange spikes stand for something that has a very strong pull on us. It is very important to us. Thus we notice all those things and go for all those things. And the blue spikes at the bottom are all the things that we try to avoid whenever possible. And this entire process is happening completely automatic. The very way we perceive the world is based on this kind of feeling that is completely beyond us. Whatever we perceive because it is important for us, because it has such an orange spike attached to it. So when we are a typical person nowadays that is very much into the internet culture, then things like Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and music and watching funny pictures and watching YouTube videos have a very strong pull on us. We notice those things because they are already important to us. It's not that they are important afterwards. Those things are, well, they are there because they are relevant to us. Same is true for food, because everyone has some relationship to food nowadays. And also for alcohol, as an example, if we are into that. Not every person is into alcohol, but still. And below the dotted line, there are all kinds of tragic events like old age, catastrophes, death, illness, catastrophes like climate change, or whatever people are currently worrying about. You could also put politics down there. And we usually try to avoid thinking about such things all the time. And again, we automatically try to avoid thinking about it. It's not like we have to make an active effort to do that. Our mind automatically shies away from such things because it is unpleasant to think about it. It creates negative emotions, and the primary task of the mind is to avoid bad feelings, to avoid suffering. This is why the Four Noble Truths are so noble, by the way, because every intentional act that we choose to do is ultimately embedded within the overarching goal of avoiding suffering. No matter what you do, if you, for example, look for a good job, you do so because it would mean suffering if you wouldn't have a good job. You try to buy a new car because it wouldn't mean suffering if you have to walk to work or, drive with your bike in the rain or in the winter to work. You buy a nice house to have a feeling of safety and security in your life, to avoid suffering. So whatever we do, however far we generalize, in the end, everything is embedded in the overarching aim or intention to avoid suffering. And this is a very hard pill to swallow because most people are never aware of that intention. Nonetheless, it is there. Because you can literally look into your experience. Whatever you do it to avoid suffering. And you can always find that small part of the puzzle, that small piece of the puzzle that is just about trying to avoid suffering. You eat food because it is painful not to do it. You listen to music because it is painful not to give in to that craving, etc. So this is very important to keep in mind. Okay, and now to a simile that the Buddha used to give when it comes to the 5 physical senses, or the 6 senses is sometimes also involved when it comes to the mind. And he pretty much said the following. Suppose, monk, a man would catch 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds and tie them together by a strong rope. He would catch a big snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey, and tie each by a strong rope. Then those 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds would each pull in the direction of their own feeding grounds and their own domain. They would be dominated by the one among them that was strongest. And when a monk has not developed and cultivated mindfulness directed to the body, the eye pulls in the direction of agreeable forms. The ear pulls in the direction of agreeable sounds, etc. And the eye also pulls away from disagreeable forms, which are repulsive. And the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, etc. and the mind all pull in other directions, all towards agreeable mental phenomena or agreeable phenomena overall, and away from disagreeable phenomena. And we always try to ignore anything that is completely irrelevant to us. And one important aspect here is also that the six senses and the body are very closely related in Buddhism. The body is also called the six sense basis. So it's what is necessary for the six senses to exist. So when the Buddha talks about the body, he usually also talks about the six senses, which are very closely related to the body, because they cannot exist without the body. And what the Buddha highlights here in the simile, and again, you can scan the QR code here to look at the sutta in detail. It's from the Samyutta Nikaya, number 35, point 247, which is a very late one in the entire book. What the Buddha points at here is that we can compare our six senses with animals, with wild and untrained animals. If they are just living in nature and have never experienced any kind of training or taming, then they do what they ever do, what they always do. And a crocodile, for example, will want to go into the water to catch some animals to eat or something like that. And our eye, as an example, is exactly like that. It will go to its domain and try to do the things that it always does. We don't really control our eye, what our eye wants. Our eye looks at whatever it wishes. Our ear hears whatever it wishes if it is untrained. The goal of the entire meditative training, as an example of the taming of the mind, as the Buddha said, is to, let's say, reroute the entire mental traffic so that there's always first mindfulness triggered, and whenever the senses want something, they have to go through you. So you have to allow them their gratification. You cannot deny your senses all the gratification that they want. That is not possible. You cannot starve them. They will win in the end. But you can make them choose a kind of food that is good for them and good for you. So this is also very important to keep in mind. And overall, if you do that, then the mental capacity that you usually have freely available for distribution will change. In the beginning, it will look something like this. The mind of an untrained person is pretty much filled with ill will, with greed, with worry about things that happen in the past, and with, let's say, lots of random thoughts that happen in the back of their head. And only a very tiny portion is available for a task at hand. And the more we train the mind to not automatically react out of the impulses of ill will or greed, as an example, the more resources are available for the task at hand. And the better we become at pretty much everything. This is also very important. And when we don't act out of hatred and greed or ill will and greed anymore, then there's no real reason to worry anymore. And if the mind has to, let's say, or the senses have to ask to do something, then the random thoughts part will also become available for the task at hand. And overall, you become a much more restrained and a much more effective person at whatever you want to achieve, which is very important. So this is the reason why meditation makes you good at everything, by the way, because you have much more control over the entire process that happens in your mind. Suddenly you can do what you wish to do because the senses allow for it without pulling you left and right. And this is, again, very important to keep in mind. So in essence, most people are like puppets, pretty much, which is not a very nice thing to think about. Other people can pretty much abuse your reactivity and manipulate you simply because they know how the entire process works. And in essence, clickbait works like that. They abuse your fear and greed automaticity so that you behave in a way that they wish. So if they say something outrageous, then that triggers either your greed or your fear or your hatred or whatever, and a feeling is created. And you have to follow that feelings. People can create bad feelings for you, and thus they control you by those bad feelings. In a sense, they make you dance for whatever they wish, and you have absolutely no say in that. And the entire thing is a very old concept and is, for example, known as divide and conquer in Rome, where the ruling class pretty much abused all the other people that were also living there to ensure some kind of stability in the empire. And those who control your feelings pretty much control you. And people who do that are media, governments, your enemies, and all kinds of other institutions. Everyone is pretty much competing for your attention, as an example. All of them try to make you listen to them. This is why it is such a good idea to maybe not watch too much videos or look at too much social media, as an example. Because again, there are always people who try to catch your attention. And even if it's just, corporations that try to catch your attention for advertisement purposes, to make you buy products. They make you greedy to buy their product. They make you miss something to buy their product. In essence, they are controlling you. It's as simple as that. And they control you by your feelings. It is always the level of feelings that they have to aim at, because that is where the manipulation happens pretty much. But yeah, now to the problem of restraint. I have praised restraint a lot already and explained why it is so necessary, but now a bit more on why it is so difficult to do, why pretty much no one does it. Because it goes against the grain of the world. It goes against the instant gratification. And most people don't like that. Most people are totally going for the instant gratification. They are limiting themselves in a certain way. They are not going for the harder drugs, as an example, because they have seen what it does to people. But still, they have a more humble kind of following instant gratification, but they are still doing it. Maybe they are eating chocolate every evening or something like that and are really looking forward to it. But again, restraint or restraining your cravings reveals the pain of sensuality. You will notice that the only reason why engaging in sensual gratification or instant gratification is that there was a painful craving for it first. And the going for it hides the craving from us, makes the craving go away. So the gratification is completely tied to the pain of craving. And this is very important to keep in mind. And if you experience that, then it's already a very deep insight, as an example. People usually blame the restraint and not the craving when it comes to bad feelings. And yeah, sensuality is a bit like, in that sense, bashing your head against the wall to enjoy the moment that the pain stops. So this is not a very pleasant way of phrasing it, but it is a bit like that. And engaging in sensuality always leads to stronger craving in the future, and thus more pain in the future, stronger pressure in the future, so to speak. And most of the time, the entire approach of restraint and the Buddha's training is too indirect for most people. For them, happiness is only possible with following pleasures, while in reality, happiness is only possible when you don't follow your senses, don't follow the pull of your senses. And this applies to worldly happiness too, by the way. Those people who are most engaged in sensuality are usually the most unhappy of them all. Like drug addicts. They are not happy, and they know that they are not happy, but they can't help themselves. So the more restrained you live, the happier you become, which is a very foreign concept for most people, because they associate happiness with getting what they want. But in reality, that is just the pleasure that you get from the temporary absence of craving. And happiness overall, as the Buddha defined it, is a sublime peace of non-pressure. It is a lightness, a feeling of relief that you are no longer slave to those things. This is what true peace is. And this is what the Buddha talked, by the way. It is not about ecstatic states of mind that you experience in meditation. Those are nice, sure, if you have not experienced the relief from the entire sensual domain, pretty much. Then you would lose interest in that, because it's no longer relevant to you, because you have found something so much better, namely a complete surmounting of all of that. And when the Buddha talked about overcoming all of that, the entire problem of restraint, etc., he compared the entire training to taming an elephant. And again, this is a two-part simile that you can also look up. I think it's Majjhima Nikaya number 125. Yeah, it is. You can scan the QR code later when we are at that point. But in essence, he said, if an elephant trainer tries to tame an elephant, he does the following. The elephant tamer plants a large post in the earth and binds the forest elephant to it by the neck in order to subdue its old feral forest habits and to inculcate in him habits congenial to human beings, to civilization pretty much. Then the elephant tamer addresses the elephant with gentle words in the beginning, because you can't force him. If you just whip the elephant all the time, he will not listen. He will just get afraid and associate the presence of humans with only the bad things. And when the elephant is addressed by such words, he starts to listen and exert his mind to understand. Then the elephant tamer will next reward him with good food and water. And then the elephant trainer tames him further thus: take up, put down, go forward, go back, get up, sit down. And this is also important. It doesn't really matter the way you train the elephant or what you do with your mind. It is just important that the mind starts doing what you say. It is all about gaining a degree of control or taming the mind in a way that it does what you wish. This is the important part. The way you go about that can be very different from person to person, by the way. Like it can be different from elephant to elephant that you try to train. And then the Sutta continues. The elephant tamer trains the elephant further in the task called the imperturbable. And imperturbable is a synonym for jhana. And this is now a very not so nice thing to think about. But what the Buddha does here is show how difficult and how lofty the state of jhana is. A man with a lance in his hand sits on the neck of the elephant. Men with lances in their hands surround him on all sides, and the elephant tamer himself stands in front of him, holding a long lance pole. And the elephant does not move. The king's elephant is able to endure blows from spears, blows from swords, blows from arrows, blows from other beings, and the thundering sounds of drums, kettle drums, trumpets, and tom-toms. Being rid of all faults and defects, purged of flaws, he is worthy of the king, in the king's service, considered one of the factors of kingship. Again, this is from Majjhima Nikaya number 125, and I think this requires some explanation. Again, I already talked a bit about jhana, but when I talk about jhana, I usually talk about it in the Buddhist sense. Namely, when it comes to the early suttas, how the Buddha taught jhana there, which is very different from how people or teachers usually teach jhana nowadays. Again, every teacher on earth that teaches jhana has a different kind of jhana available to him, and he teaches it in a very different way. There are 40, if not hundreds, of different kinds of jhanas, and not all of them can be right, and not all of them can be what the Buddha talked about. So there is a very stark conflict going on. And when they try to legitimize and explain that their jhanas are definitely what the Buddha talked, they usually cherry-pick suttas and just highlight one aspect that might be fulfilled when it comes to their jhana. But in reality, I like to call those things states bordering the jhanas, to not offend those people too much. In reality, it's probably not, or very likely not, what the Buddha talked about, but still. This elephant, as an example, is trained in the imperturbable. And when the Buddha talks about imperturbable, he means that. It is a complete inability to be affected by all those horrible things that the elephant trainer and his apprentices do to the elephant. We train our mind in meditation when we reach the level of jhana in such a way that neither of those things, of those very things even, could disturb our mind. We could be poked with spears, blows from sword, blows from arrows, and still be at peace. The Buddha even gave a very vivid simile of the saw, where he explains that even highway robbers could saw you apart limb by limb, and there would still be no ill will arising in you towards those highway robbers, because your mind has surmounted the domain, at least of the body, that is just taken apart by a saw. This is the kind of liberation the Buddha was talking about. It's not a nice state in meditation. It is there all the time. Your mind is trained to a degree that those states are available to you at any time. And the Buddha often talked about jhana while moving, and people and the commentaries of the Pali Canon always try to rationalize it away and put a comment there and say, yeah, that's all nice, but it's obviously after you get up from your meditation, and then you are like that. Which is not what the Buddha talked about. He often talked about the composure and the jhana that is, for example, the result of walking meditation. And again, people usually ignore that because it does not fit their definition of jhana. But yeah, more on that in chapter 7. Now a short description on formal enduring, on how you can do that, how you can try to align the training that the Buddha prescribed with your own practice, so that you don't have to modify your approach to meditation too much. You could take, for example, a posture and set a timer, and do not adjust anything about your meditation in any way after you made that kind of resolution. You do not move yourself, you do not scratch yourself, you endure itches, you endure pain, you endure any discomfort, you endure heat and cold, obviously within reason. It should not be endangering to life, as an example. And you endure thoughts of doubt, of hatred, of lust. You do not follow any of those. You do not act based on the presence of such things. You endure bad feelings in the meditation. You just sit there, and whatever arises in the mind, whatever arises in the body, is just endured and treated with a kind of indifference. Or you try that. In the beginning, it will not work. Everyone has to gradually move towards that final goal of imperturbability. But still, making an effort at that is very beneficial. And non-enduring makes you worse at it. So you try to give it your best. The mind always gets better at what it does most often. And when you endure often, you get better at enduring. It is a very simple thing. But most of the time, people think about meditation as something that is working in an entirely different way from everything else. So yeah, but all of this goes against our inclination, and this is why people usually don't do it. It is painful initially, but it's quite necessary. In the end, it stops being painful, and it's a very pleasant state, because all those things that you typically had to act out of are no longer bothering you. So imagine there's pain, or there are itches, or there's discomfort, and you can just shrug it off. That's a very nice state to be in, even if it is not yet jhana. And overall, this is how the negative chain reaction works when we train ourselves, when we engage in sensuality. It starts with just some unwholesome states, in the past as an example, and then we introduce lots of sensual behaviors, lots of unwholesome behaviors, like hating other people, insulting other people, engaging in instant gratification all the time. And then over time, the mind, which is represented by the grid here, gets more and more filled with more and more unwholesome impulses, and over time we develop more remorse, more worry, more hatred, stronger reactivity, and in the end we are a complete mess, which is what we absolutely try to avoid. It is no secret that most societies, well, it's now changing in the West for some reason, regard people who have some emotional control as very wise, and the entire thing as very attain-worthy, because it's nice to have that. Nowadays, people glorify emotional reactivity, which is a futile attempt at alleviating your suffering. This is a dead end. It can never work. It goes against the way reality really works. And if you try to overcome that, you have to introduce more wholesome states to the entire equation. If you start with a very unwholesome mind, then you have no choice but to gradually reduce the amount of unwholesome states of mind and introduce more wholesome ones. You try to replace them in the beginning. You restrain yourself more. You try to treat other people nicer. You might give some money to charity. You do merit, pretty much. You meditate a lot. And thus there are fewer and fewer impediments. And in the end, there's also only wholesome states of mind, which is a very nice thing. It's a very nice state to be in, and it's very important to work towards that if your goal is to overcome suffering once and for all. Again, this is not every person's goal, but if you desire any kind of success, no matter worldly or spiritual, you have to restrain yourself in some way or another. I also did a lot of other videos on the channel. And you can also do that in everyday life. You don't have to just limit yourself to the meditation cushion, which is again a very important point, because oftentimes people say that they don't have time for all of this. The good news is, back in the time of the Buddha, people also had no time for that, because they were working 16 hours in the field or something like that, and always had to do something. This is why the Buddha used virtuous behavior, as a vehicle for them to train. And in essence, for example, restricting your eating or fasting, instant gratification detox, temporary retreats, lifting weights even because it's hard, dieting, even work, those are all instances of sense restraint. And thus they are very beneficial because they teach you the principle that you can then apply in other areas. You could enjoy yourself right now, but you choose not to. You choose to restrain yourself, and you choose to instead endure the negative feeling. And this requires initially a lot of effort, but after a time, it becomes effortless. It becomes a habit, and at that point, it's just the natural mode of being. And it really works like cultivating any other skill. The more we do something, the more we become like that. And whatever we do most frequently, it at some point becomes our natural mode of being. And moderation in eating deserves a bit more, more attention, because eating, again, is not optional. The eating addiction is thus especially bad, because people cannot stop it. And the Buddha really named it explicitly, while other things were summarized under just sensuality. Eating always had a special spot. And he was always criticizing monks who were just eating as much as they can, then laying on their back and sleeping, pretty much. He heavily criticized them and called such behaviors very blameworthy and very unwholesome. And thus he advised only eating 1 meal a day for monks. And he really praised it for health benefits, for energy benefits, for alertness benefits, or for many other things that are all very good and very supportive for the spiritual practice. And it's better for lay people to also do that. Sense restraint or anything like that is by no means limited to monks. For example, again, I already said that it leads to fewer injuries at night, and lay people have an easier time when all the people come at once to get their food, which is what happens nowadays. It's a much better system that the Buddha introduced back then, simply on the basis of occurring problems. But yeah, now we come to the last section for today, namely the section of noble communities, and I put it into the chapter of virtue, because it is not yet Dhamma, even though it technically does not sound too much like virtue. And today we have a very important observation, and this is probably the last slide. And this is about a sutta where the Buddha talked about how people gather and form communities according to their elements. And I will just read it to you and explain in the meantime. Now, on that occasion, not far from the Blessed One, the Venerable Sariputta, the Venerable Mahamoggallana, and the Venerable Mahakassapa and Anuruddha, another monk, were walking back and forth with a number of monks. And the Buddha asked, "Monks, do you see Sariputta walking back and forth with a number of monks? All of those monks are of great wisdom. Do you see Moggallana? All of those monks are of great spiritual power. Do you see Kassapa? All of those monks are proponents of the ascetic practices. Monks, it is by the way of elements that beings come together and unite. Those of an inferior disposition come together with those and unite with those of an inferior disposition. Those of a good disposition come together and unite with those of a good disposition. In the past they did so, in the future they will do so, and now at the present they do so too." So this is a very wise statement of the Buddha, and it's from Samyutta Nikaya number 14.50. So what the Buddha says here essentially is that people form groups according to their likes and dislikes. Whatever they want to achieve, they look for in other people and they form groups together. And in the process of forming groups together, they become even more like each other. So it's essentially forming a filter bubble. But you can use that in a positive way too. If you surround yourself with people who are wisdom seekers, who are very wise, who behave in a very moral way, and you spend time with them, then it's very likely that you will imitate their behavior and in turn also have a fruitful ground for attaining wisdom. And the Buddha always was very keen on keeping the Sangha tidy, so that there are no negative influences on such a community that people could use to strive towards liberation. He even said that a noble friend is the most valuable thing that we can initially have when it comes to the path of the Buddha's training. This is not because friendship is something magical or nice, but because of the effects of the friendship. You will likely be inspired by your noble friends and behave more in the same way they do, if you see that their training is working, as an example. And so the Buddha noticed that a lot of the learning that humans do happens by imitation of others. This is the reason why we try to avoid people that are bad for us, or we should avoid people that are bad for us, and should seek out people that are good for us. Again, this is very important, and you should really, let's say, as a spiritual seeker at least, scan your social environment for people that are a very negative influence. If there are evil people you surround yourself with, then chances are quite good that you rationalize their behavior and don't find it so bad anymore, and that's not a very good thing. And I think this is a good time to stop. Next time we talk about this topic, namely the 2 social laws in depth, but for now this should be enough. If you have any remaining questions regarding the content that I have presented today in this lecture, feel free to ask down in the comments below, and I will answer the questions immediately, but I will also record them and write them down for a Q&A lecture or 2 Q&A lectures in the end, where I try to answer the most frequent question or the most frequent problems that people name in the comments. And again, please start a new comment for each question so that YouTube informs me that something happened and someone commented. Otherwise, I will likely overlook it. I cannot look through all the past videos each day. I will only look at the stuff that YouTube throws at me. So please do that. And yeah, this is pretty much it for today. I think we talked for about an hour, so it's more than time to stop. If you enjoy the lecture so far, feel free to share it with other people, to like and subscribe and do all the other YouTube stuff that is likely helps the visibility of such content. So if you want to do that, feel free to support me. And yeah, I think that's enough. Have a nice day and goodbye.